Hello there, you are listening to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we celebrate films we think might be underrated or underseen. I'm your host for this week, Alice Oliver. With me, as always, is Josh Hallam, and he chose the film this week and he went with Blockers from 2018. So let's get stuck in. Right then, listeners, as I said, this week's episode is all about Blockers from 2018. But first, Josh, tell us a little bit about our new Patreon.
Yes, it's just a quick shout out just to let you know that we are now on Patreon. You might have seen it on the social medias. The Patreon is linked in the description for this episode, but if you head on to patreon.com/justfilmsandthat, there's a couple of tiers on there. Starts from £2, and for your money, you get episodes a day early, you get extended episodes, bonus content, you can get in touch with us, and then the tiers and benefits sort of go up and escalate from there. So any support you can give us will always be massively appreciated. That's patreon.com/justfilmsandthat.
Yes, so as Josh said there, we are well and truly on Patreon, so head over there and check us out. And like Josh said, any support that you guys give us is always much appreciated. But anyway, Josh, Blockers.
Blockers, Alice.
Blockers. Tell me about Blockers. I want to know what this film is about, why you picked it, and I'm also going to say spoiler warning to the listeners because I forgot to do that slightly earlier on, but there we go. It's there. You've been warned.
Blockers. So I'm really interested to know what you think of this one. But anyway, what's it about? Right. So Blockers, it's a bit of a twist on your traditional teen sex comedy. Basically, you've got three girls, been friends since they were kids. It's prom night. And they all decide to make a pact to lose their virginity together. Sounds like a familiar story, doesn't it? But their parents, so two of the girls' dads and one of the girls' mums, who are also friends from being, when the kids knew each other from being little, also find out about that and decide between them that they're going to stop their girls from losing their virginity on prom night. And that is pretty much what it's about. Hijinks ensue, as they always do in these films. Why did I pick it? Right, well, I watched this not that long ago. I say not that long ago. COVID makes everything extend by 2 years. It could have been that I watched it just after it came out. Yes. 5 years ago now. But anyway, 2018 is 5 years ago. That's mad. Anyway, I'd heard it was good when I watched it. And I think I might have heard it reviewed elsewhere or just seen, had it recommended by a friend or whatever. And I looked at the scores at the time because when I watched it, we were doing the podcast and was quite surprised at the scores. Some scores in particular, which we'll come on to later. I also think that this film is an interesting twist on a tried and tested formula, and that it actually has some, I think, a little bit of an important nugget of a message in there. And so I suppose it's underrated because I think it did okay when it came out because it was on a fairly small budget and I think it made its budget back and then some. So maybe not underseen, although I think it probably should be seen by more people. But main reason would be underrated. So had you seen this one before?
I had not seen it, but I had heard of it. Didn't really know what it was about or anything, but I do remember it coming out. I do definitely remember seeing like the trailer for it or the posters for it or whatever, and just sort of dismissing it and just thinking that's probably not a film I'm ever going to see.
Another run-of-the-mill bollocks.
Yeah, I don't need to see that. Not too bothered. Like I find John Cena quite funny every now and then, but I was like, so I had just dismissed it. So that is why last week when you said that we might do it, I was like, oh yeah, pick that one.
Okay.
Pick that one. Keen to know.
I've got to know then. Did you like it? What did you think?
So in general, I thought it was all right.
All right. Okay.
I thought it was all right. I thought it was all right. I definitely didn't hate it.
No.
There's definitely a lot to like in there.
Yep.
But there were also just some improvements, shall we say, that could have been made. But overall, Josh, I would say pleasantly surprised.
Pleasantly all right.
I reckon this was an uphill battle for this film because I went in, I think, not having very high expectations.
No.
So it's hard to pull you back from that when you feel like you've already made your mind up.
It is.
And it did do that. And I was, like, some of the things I was actually like, oh yeah, I'm actually impressed by that. Either that joke is exceptionally funny or like that point is really interesting or those characters' relationships is really strong and really developed. But yeah, good.
It happened with me with basketball.
Oh yeah.
So I started basketball and I was like, not sure.
I'm gonna fucking like this.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is for me. And then within like half an hour, it sort of won me over.
Amazing.
And I can definitely see how this would happen with this film. It reminded me a little bit, whilst I was prepping the episode, it reminded me a little bit of Easy A.
100%.
It's not,
100%.
it's nowhere near as good as Easy A.
It's not.
Because I think Easy A is one of the best films we've ever covered.
Easy A is a pretty darn good film.
It's a proper modern classic Easy A. I think this is decent and is underrated, as I've already said. So what did you like about it then?
So what did I like about it? So in general, I do quite like the concept, right? So teenage girls exploring their sexuality in a way that is purely about them isn't something that you see that often in more mainstream films. So we've certainly seen examples of it elsewhere in cinema, but not too often in these more mainstream kind of shiny Hollywood films that
not in a comedy
historically...
as well.
Indeed. And historically, these films focus on men and their sexual experiences. And I think that all this was helped with a more than capable cast, right? So it's not the most groundbreaking acting I've ever seen, but they are all enjoyable to watch. And some of them bring some real moments to the film as well as the comedy. I thought that Catherine Newton, who plays Julie, so she is Leslie Mann's daughter.
Yeah, she is, yeah.
And then, so her friend Kayla, who is played by Geraldine, and I do hope I'm saying this correctly, Viswanathan.
I think that's right, yeah, Viswanathan, yeah.
Okay, so then she plays Kayla. Those two together, I think, are really great and have some really great comedy moments, but then some great sort of friendship development between them as well, and as well as Sam also. And I also think that John Cena had some really great comedy moments in this and really brought the laughs. And I have never noticed how massive his hands are.
Yeah.
Did you know that John Cena's hands were that
big?
big?
You put him next to normal sized people.
I couldn't believe it. And this is the thing, because I think last time I see him was in like Suicide Squad, right?
Yeah.
So he's around, big muscly,
yeah.
Alongside Leslie Mann. I was like, whoa.
It's like in the new Knives Out, Dave Bautista is like twice the size of every other person.
Indeed he is.
It's like one of the cast members is a shed. And then, everyone else is just a normal person. It's like you say, it's so noticeable when you put these massive hench blokes next to normal sized human beings.
Yeah. But yeah, I did enjoy it overall. So, what were some of the things that you really liked about it?
So overall, I think it's really funny. I laughed more. I laughed more watching it this time than I actually expected to. But there was a lot of moments that I'd forgotten existed that I was laughing at. I do think it's quite heartwarming in equal measure. I think they get the balance between sort of feel good and comedy quite right. Like I said before, it does remind me a little bit of Mean Girls at Easy A, where they build this little world full of a real heart in the middle and then great supporting characters throughout. So let's talk about the cast then, because you've touched on it there. So it's not a massively known cast at the time. Obviously, the most known person in it at the time probably would have been either Leslie Mann or John Cena, but John Cena certainly wasn't known at the time for being an actor. He was still very much, and I mean, even now, some people probably still know him more from wrestling because it's obviously such a massive franchise and business and stuff. But he certainly wasn't known as an actor at this point, and I think he does a really good job of bringing that character. So he plays a really neurotic character, and in fact, the fact that he's normally you'd associate him, particularly like a lot of wrestlers to actors, with action roles, whereas he's diversified a little bit more. And has done comedy and more serious stuff like he does at the time. So because you don't have actors that are that well known, because you've got Ike Barinholtz in there as well, who plays Hunter, and then the three girls who were all... Catherine Newton's probably the most known of them now, and by the end of this year, she'll probably be a household name because she's in the new Ant-Man film. She's Ant-Man's daughter.
Right. Oh, yeah.
They have recast Ant-Man's daughter from Endgame, and she is Ant-Man's daughter. So I imagine by the end of this year, she'll probably be a household name. The other two I don't think I've ever seen them in anything else. So they're pretty newcomers. And because they're newcomers, and because the other three, the adult cast, aren't that well known, you don't really get any baggage. So you I see them almost as their characters, which I think is really good. They're all pretty likable. They all get their own moment to shine, whether that's be a serious moment or a funny moment or whatever. I actually think that the kids that they cast, the young girls, could be their kids.
Yeah.
Like that, like
Yeah,
they do such a good job, particularly with
Good
Leslie
job with the
Mann,
casting.
because with the film opens, or part of the open is Leslie Mann and Catherine Newton getting ready at the same time. They do a really good job of it being like making you believe that they are mother and daughter. Yeah, so the cast do a really good job because the parents in it, they're not like old fuddy duddies, but they're all sort of in their 40s, and they do a good job of making it out like they don't know what's going on with the kids in inverted commas, but not by like being too obvious about it. So like again, they do it with a lot of the supporting characters. So what Kayla's stepdad. So Kayla's got a stepdad in it, and one of the things he does is he's trying to take a picture of her on prom night, and it just made me laugh. Because at one point he goes, "Let's get a picture," and he goes, "Oh, took a picture of my face." Like, and it's like that sort of thing where it makes me. It feels like real people, you know, that idea. Because quite often in these films, there's a tendency to be like, "Oh, make it really obvious that they're old and that they don't know what's going on." Whereas in this, some of them know more than others, and it feels more real, like, to me. As I say, it's really, really funny. So it is a sex comedy, right? It's essentially reverse American Pie. It is girls trying to lose their virginity rather than boys, but the jokes in it aren't really about sex. There's not actually many sex-related jokes in there. There's not many blue jokes in there. There's one proper scene of sort of gross out, but even then, it's not, because there's a scene in it. If you haven't seen it, which is it's worth watching just for this scene, but where some teenagers convince John Cena that the chugging contest they're going to have is beer through the arse.
That was a difficult watch, I'll be honest.
But it is gross out, but they don't, like other films would show like more gross elements of it. Whereas that, you know what's going on because you know the other kids aren't doing it, and it works, right? So it's not too gross out for me anyway. We've talked before about gross out humor and how, you know, you can only, a little bit of it goes a long way, I think, is the, for me, is the best way of
less
putting
is
that.
more.
Yeah, less is more. So it's a sex comedy where none of the jokes are about sex. Like if you watch American Pie, it is so dated now because the way they're talking about women and sex and relationships is just so dated, where I think you could probably watch this in 10 years and it's not really dated apart from the references in it, but in terms of the language, that I can't see how the way they talk will become offensive in any way. So I think I thought that was really good. And so I just think they strike that balance really, really well. Between feel-good comedy, heartwarming, and a little bit of realism as well. And I do think the message is important, which I'll come on to. But what did you think about it, and what else did you like about it, or have you pretty much touched on everything?
No, I mean, certainly echo a lot of what you've said as well there, and as well as being balanced in terms of the comedy and the more heartwarming sort of factors of it. They've got quite a good balance in that the three girls, so Julie, Kayla, and Sam, are actually, in a lot of ways, really emotionally mature and like really empathetic and stuff. And then you've got their parents who are almost so neurotic at times that it makes them irrational. Like it means that they sort of lose control a little bit more over themselves and over their emotions, whereas the three girls for a lot of the time are just kind of, they're holding it together. They have quite reasonable and rational responses to certain situations. If things don't work out how they planned, that, you know, they can be totally mature about that and just be like, oh well, because like Kayla obviously really wants to lose her virginity. And she said, obviously, she goes to do it with that kid, the junkie boyfriend sort of thing, with the DMT macaroons and that.
The cook. Is it the cook or the chef?
The chef,
That's it, yeah.
And they go to do it, and suddenly in the moment, she's not really feeling it. And she's like, oh, can we just do other stuff instead? And he's like, yeah, cool, whatever. And she's not like going the next day and her mates aren't taking the piss out of her. It's like, oh, you didn't lose your virginity, how lame or whatever.
Yeah.
She's literally just like, oh, I didn't feel like doing it. And they're like, okay, cool. And that's it.
And that's what I like about it. It's not, I suppose it must have been quite a difficult balance to strike this, because if you just went, it's like American Pie, but it's girls, they could have been just completely misread, completely miswritten, completely misdone. And instead what they do is, like you say, they make them more rounded, more intelligent, and more real feeling characters. So like you say, I quite like that. So that, I think, that leads on to my sort of idea, and I think the message of this film is quite important, right? Which is, I'm not going to hammer the point home, but I think it's quite an important message around sort of, there's a few things in there. It touches quite a lot on female sexuality, empowerment around sex, and double standards as well. So John Cena's wife in it bollocks them because they go to his house for some reason, and she finds out what they're doing, and she's like, but why is it double standards for men and women? And there is a bit of that scene of like, you've really hammered the point home here. Like, you were showing us, and now you've told us. But I do think it's important, because maybe not everyone would get it, that she is making the point that why does it matter that they're girl? Why is it that when girls lose their virginity, it's this sad loss of innocence, whereas when lads do it, it's just fun. And I think they strike the balance and they get the message home really well in this. Like you say, to the point where Kayla changes her mind, or even the good thing with that storyline is she starts out like, "Oh, I'm not bothered. It's weird. I'm going to do it," and then goes, "Oh, actually, I don't want to," and nothing is made of it. It's just like, essentially, what I quite like about it is it does a really good job of highlighting the importance of female empowerment and sexuality, whilst also accepting that everyone dances to their own tune.
Exactly. And
Do you know what I mean?
completely normalizing that as well. Like when she's with the chef in the bedroom and she's like, "Oh, I don't think I do want to have sex anymore." And he's literally like, "Yeah, that's cool." And the first thing he says is, "Well, we could do some journaling." So it's like, and that's a really nice response, because it's like, "Oh, I still want to hang out with you. And it's totally cool that you don't want to have sex, but here's something else we can do as well." And then for her, because then as soon as he says that, then she's like, "Oh, actually, you can go down on me," or whatever. So like they can go the next level. But I reckon a lot of that really is to do with the way he responded, because he was just so chill, so cool about it. It wasn't like making her feel like that she'd let him down or whatever, or that she was a loser because she wasn't losing her virginity on prom night or whatever. But yeah, there was quite a bit of that going through, and the younger characters in this, I think, were definitely the more interesting ones.
Yeah, and in a lesser thought out version of the script, there's definitely an alternate version, if that is written around the same time as American Pie or something like that, where he forces himself on her. Yeah. Or and I don't mean forces himself on her in like a dark way. In like and then a dad bursts in and beats him up, and it's like, "Yeah, go on, Dad," because he's a prick, and whereas in this, it's very, like you say, it's very much like, "Oh, right, okay." And it feels more. It gets the point across better because of that. Definitely. And like the idea of, because one of the characters in it, Sam, is gay and sort of is in the process of coming to terms of coming out, isn't she? And she has that thing. She speaks to another lesbian, and she sort of says, "Well, if you don't know, then try it." Yeah. And she does, and she's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely not. It's not for me." Yeah. as in heterosexual sex is not for me.
Yeah, yeah. She realizes she's gay. With Chad. Yeah. With Ginger Chad.
Poor Chad. Oh. But yeah, so do you know what I mean with that point, or am I just looking for something that's not there?
No, I definitely do. And I think it's definitely part of it, and it is part of the conversation that they wanted to start. And, whether it is just piggybacking off movements that were already happening or whatever, I don't know. But it's rare, like I said, in mainstream cinema to have sex amongst girls that young as well, to be normalized and to be just part of a normal conversation. It's like, well, I'm an 18-year-old girl. Like, let's be real. Let's talk about the things that are actually going on instead of pretending it doesn't happen, or behaving in a way or depicting the story in a way where it's like women are just the thing to be sought after, or just the thing to look at or whatever, which is obviously what... a lot of films in the 90s and sort of into the early 2000s were certainly very guilty of, but it's definitely getting better in some regards. Whereas in this, it was about them as individuals, and it was about their individual sexual journey. Like they're all virgins, they're all just kind of figuring it out, and they're all there to sort of support each other and just be chill with whatever the other one chooses. But yeah, it was good, and you could certainly feel the... original isn't the right word, because I didn't feel like I was seeing anything new, but I suppose it's an unoriginal story just told differently and with a wider variety of perspectives. We'll move on now then to talking about anything that we didn't like about the film, or perhaps anything that we would change. So, Josh, I reckon we both got some stuff to say here, but very interested to know where you stand on this. Go on.
I think you might have more than me. I don't have loads. So my first, my sort of main point is around Ike Barinholtz's character, the character of Hunter. At first, when he first shows up, so he's like he's like this deadbeat dad character, isn't he? Like, he's a bit of a loser, hard partying. The character that we've seen so many times in other things, the dad that's immature, blah, 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 blah. And at first, it's a bit like he's in a different film. It's like he is in those sort of teen comedies from 10, 15, 20 years ago. And at first you're like, oh, but then as it goes on, his character does unravel a little bit more and you learn a little bit more about him. And the way that's done is really, really good. But I do think they could have done more with it, because what you learn as it goes along is that the reason he is distanced from Sam is actually more to do with his breakdown of his marriage with his wife and her mum. And he makes accusations about her essentially abusing him emotionally and abusing him, and perhaps hitting him as well at points, and actually really demeaning him. And he has this little speech and it's really well done, but then it's sort of brushed off a little bit.
It is almost literally brushed off, isn't it? Because he's saying it to John Cena and Leslie Mann.
And they're just not listening.
As soon as he finishes, they jump into a new conversation, and he even says like, oh, why do I bother? Like, or no, he says like, oh, it was just good to say that out loud. Off my chest,
yeah. But I do think something could have, in a film like this, which is clearly trying to be a bit forward thinking in terms of, relationships and sexual politics. I thought there was a missed opportunity there, because the male abuse victim is not a well-trodden path in cinema. It's not a not trodden path, but it's certainly something that it's like, well, you could have maybe done something there, and maybe it was a little bit of a missed opportunity. So other than that, there's not really loads from me. I suppose you could have pushed it even more with that idea of female empowerment and female sexual freedom. But I don't know how you would do that, and it's a tricky tightrope to walk. Because if you keep pushing it, then you do just end up with female American Pie, and that's not what you want, because the whole reason this film is good is because it's not that. Do you know what I mean? So, but other than that, no, I think it's just maybe a missed opportunity with the Hunter character. But what about you? Because you're sort of middling on this. I get the impression you think it's all right, but there's definitely stuff you don't like. So let's hear it.
Well, you know what? It's not even that there's that much. It's just that the main thing is kind of very broad and just sort of encompasses the whole film. So in general, I just don't think that the script is particularly sophisticated or intelligent. So it's definitely suitable for the genre. And it's not that it's bad, but there was a lot of tell, don't show with characters, literally just saying how they feel all the time instead of showing us. And I wanted it to be, and I thought you'd bring this up because I was thinking it too, but I wanted it to be as well written and as good as Easy A.
Yeah.
And some of the vibes really did feel similar, but it wasn't quite hitting that sort of quality. And that's a film from 2010, so that was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And that is my biggest issue with this, is just, it's like, because some of the jokes were really well crafted and really funny, but a lot of it was literally just, I'm a character and this is how I feel. And it's like, well, I'm a character and this is how I feel. And I just, you see,
no,
but it is a mainstream film, so I don't know. A bit more nuance is all I'm after, I think.
I can see that, because it's like we touched on with Kayla's mum, Marcy. She has a big speech about double standards between women and men when it comes to sex, right? And that is quite a well-written piece of dialogue, and I get why they've put it in there. But there is an element of like, I know that's what the film is. I know the film is showing me that, but you've had someone tell me that. So I do get that. I wonder if perhaps there's something to be said for they were so focused on the end products and what they were trying to get across that perhaps some of the dialogue could have been redone.
Either that, or they were intentionally holding back a little bit just to get that broad appeal and to just maybe even kind of make sure people watch it, because it's hard. It's hard when stuff like this comes out, because a lot of people who perhaps aren't used to seeing female heavy casts, and especially young women as well, might not be prepared to go and see it. Like, they might just write it off straight away. Like, Ghostbusters with women, rubbish. Ocean's 8, rubbish, like all this, like you just
Look
write it
at
off
Bridesmaids
immediately.
as well. So
Well,
Bridesmaids
Bridesmaids really broke
the
the
mold.
mold, really, didn't
But
it?
if you remember when Bridesmaids came out, it was marketed as the female hangover.
Right, yeah.
And it is not the female hangover. And I think I might have touched on this on other films, but I think the marketing of that really let it down.
Yeah.
Because actually, it's one of the best comedies ever written, in my view. I think it's absolutely outstanding, Bridesmaids. I think it's brilliant. But when it came out, and it wasn't that it was a slow burn, because people who went to watch it loved it, right? But it was like, if you've seen The Hangover, what about with women? And it was like, but it's not that. It's just sort of roughly linked because it's about a wedding. But so, and there is a tendency to do that, isn't there? To like frame everything through. Well, it's almost an extension of the male gaze, isn't it?
In what way?
As in, like, you're framing it for men.
Right, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's like, this needs to be something that I'm familiar with. Oh, it's Ghostbusters, but women.
Yeah, it's not framing it for men. It's using the male version as a reference point as if it's not its own thing.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a huge issue that, you do hear it discussed a lot, that it's like, where are the original stories? We don't need copies. Like there's a whole load of women who've had different experiences and have amazing stories to tell and stuff. It's like, you don't just need to go, oh, Ghostbusters, but with women. It's like, nah. Well, how about a new group of ghost fighting supernatural hunters? Do you know what I mean? Like, let's see the new stuff. And so with this, it felt like, well, the concept was trying to be a bit that, but the more sophisticated and I think nuanced elements of the script that could have been in there were missing. But I do think that it was designed that way specifically to make sure you're hitting that wider audience and to make sure enough people see the film, sort of thing. So, I get it. It's a business. You've got money to make. You've got like writers and visual effects guys to pay. Like, I get it. And the other thing, and this is a really specific thing, so we've gone from my first point, which was really sort of broad and just encompassed the whole film. And then this one is really super specific. So I'm wondering if you can shed any light on this for me, Josh. Right. So just something I noticed, okay? So when they're at one of the prom after parties at a house or a lake house or something, right? And then loads of police turn up, like loads of police, as if they're responding to some major incident as opposed to just underage drinking. And then you've got this sequence where people are like chatting and you can hear the police sirens in the background and see the lights flashing and all this. And then when everyone gets in their cars to drive off, you get this wide shot of the area, like a bit of drone footage or whatever. And there's no police cars present at all. So there's that for inconsistency, right? But then also, what happened with the police? Like, did they arrest anyone? Like, the chef, their friend, had DMT on him. Like, isn't that one of the most potent drugs in the world?
Yeah.
Also, who tipped off the police? Who phoned them to be there? And why didn't we see anyone make that call? And what was the reasons they phoned them?
I must say,
do you know when you ever focus in on a detail and then it's all you can think about?
Yeah, and I suppose as well, because we've seen so many films of this kind where the police do get called. Like, the first thing that comes to mind is like Superbad. But yeah, maybe it does seem very much like a plot point that needed to happen to get from one point of the story to the next.
It was just, but it was just kind of a way to break up the party, it seemed, and to sort of.
And if the police were called to that, which seems to be in a rural area, why weren't the police called to the massive party in the hotel, which is
that was odd.
It's
wasn't
got
it?
so
all those
many people in it.
Drinking. Yeah. No, I don't know. I just thought it's like, how did those police
turn up? That is a weird
up? Who tipped them off?
Yeah.
But then what is the consequence of that? I guess I just like to see. But in a film, you want everything to happen for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Everything's got a cause and everything's got a consequence. And with this, you didn't see the cause, so you didn't see who phoned the police or why they phoned the police, and then you didn't see the effect of it. No one got arrested, no one got a warning. There was no like darker subplot about like the drugs industry or whatever. Like, it was literally, it was just nothing, and it was just a bit annoying, I think.
It's literally just there to move them from one place, because the whole point in that scene is it interrupts at least one of the characters almost about to have sex, doesn't it?
Yeah, but surely, I don't know, I feel like you could have come up with better ways, I think. Be a bit more creative instead of just doing the thing that all the other films have done. It was like, oh, we need this party to break up. How about they hear police sirens and then they run away? I feel like you could be more creative than that with that. Anyway, that was it, Josh. It was just those 2 points, really. Like, overall, pleasantly surprised, mostly positive feeling. Just a couple of little things that I noticed, but otherwise pretty good. We'll move on now then to talking about the critical reception. So I haven't seen this, but Josh picked this film because he thinks it's underrated. So this is underrated. I think we can...
What are we thinking?
I feel like we could agree that it's not a masterpiece and that we're not expecting it to get scores through the roof.
But it's not awful.
So it's not awful. It's definitely not awful.
There's definitely one of these scores that's going to surprise you, so I'm going to ask you for a
that's
specific
fun.
score, but give us a broad score first.
If you think it's underrated, I reckon you think that this is at least a mid-6. So I think it got less than that. I'm going to say that it got 59% or 5.9 and sit around that.
On average.
On average, I reckon.
And so what would you give it then?
I'd give it a little bit more than that because I do appreciate what it's trying to do. And I think you've got to appreciate that and take that for what it is, as well as the whole thing. I don't think it's amazing, but I like some of what it's trying to do. So I reckon we could nudge that right on up to the high 6s, at least.
Okay. And this is a specific bit. What do you think it did better with the critics or with the audience?
Tricky one, because I think the critics even may be complimentary of it because it's dealing with the female sexuality instead of male. So maybe the critics liked that. So I reckon maybe the critics gave it more than the audience did.
You're right.
Okay, go on.
You're spot on. But this is one of the reasons I picked it. So at the time of recording on IMDb, gets 6.2 out of 10.
Okay, yeah.
The audience on Rotten Tomatoes, and this is the sort of more surprising score, give it 51%.
Okay,
which I think's low.
That's quite low.
And the critics on Rotten Tomatoes give it 84%. Yeah,
wow.
So the critics really did like this. I think so that averages out then, because the critics score really drags that up. That averages out at 65 or 6.5. So I would say we've talked about what we've talked about, right? And I'm not saying this is not an absolute smash hit, knock it out of the park, but I think it's decent. I think it tackles some issues quite well. And I think this is a solid 7 for me. What would you say? Is 65 underrated?
I will say that it is a little bit underrated because I need to take into account the fact that I went into this with low expectations and it surpassed those. And that is hard to do, I think, when you've already judged a book by its cover, which you're not meant to do, but we're all guilty of anyway. So yeah, I'll reckon Blockers, underrated.
Well, there we go. Another underrated one in the bag. I'm quite glad that went in there. I thought that could be touch and go. And I'm glad we got it in there. Blockers, in the end, is underrated. We will be back with another episode next week. So keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, it's filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. As we said at the start of the episode, check us out over at Patreon, patreon.com/justfilms and that. And of course, we're on all the social medias. If you just search for Just Films and That on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, we're on all of them. So check us out, get in touch. We'd like to hear from you. And we're also on the television, aren't we, Alice?
We are indeed. Every Friday evening from 6 p.m, you can find us on the local TV network. So if you live in Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Liverpool, or the northeast of England, you can find us on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. So that's every Friday evening from 6 p.m, just me and Josh having a little chat about all our favourite underrated and underseen films.
Yes, lots of ways to hear us, see us, get in touch. And as ever, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week. It's goodbye from me. Cheerio.
Bye.